Hello, fellow birders. My name is Denis Kania. Quite often in these mini tutorials, I've been talking about data that's been collected at Fermilab over the last 33 years. Today, we're going to take a closer look at that bird monitoring project. On the DuPage Birding Club education channel, we'll be discussing all things bird-related. And as I mentioned, today we'll be taking a close look at the bird monitoring project at Fermilab. Fermilab is a huge open space. In fact, there's 6,800 acres of open space. And on this aerial, you can see most of the lab. And even this picture does not include everything. But you can see on the south border here, this is Route 56 or Butterfield Road. And this is the bike path that runs from that point up along Kirk Road. This is Kirk Road here. Way up here in the north is the northern boundary, which is approaching Route 38, but not quite that far north. This is Eola Road here. And if we were to extend further to the east, we would see Route 59, where you can get on Batavia Road. And this would be Batavia Road coming through right here. You can see that leads you to the high rise, otherwise known as Wilson's Hall. And you can see there's quite a bit of infrastructure that goes along with the particle physics research that's going on here. So there are a lot of buildings, there's a lot of roadways and things going on that kind of fragment this open space, but still there's the impact of those areas is very small. There is about 2,000 acres that's still in agriculture, and even those provide a different habitat for some of our species. But overall, it's a large mosaic of varying habitats. We do have some larger ponds and lakes on site. There's a lot of wetlands. This whole area here is pretty much wetland. There's many other sites as well. You can see there's an array of woodlands, true woodlands, such as this one here. This is called the Big Woods. And then there's others. This is another another wooded area here. This is actually a savanna here. So there are varying types of woodlands. And further to the east, which you cannot see here, there's a lot of scrubland areas and more lakes. So quite diverse as far as habitats. And because of the vast majority of this area being restricted, there's really not a lot of human impact continually on these sites. So it provides some good areas for birds to utilize. So if we're looking for this information, you could Google the birds of Fermilab, and you'll easily come up with this page right here. This is a good starting point. And what this is a complete list of all the birds that can be found at Fermilab. And looking right here, we can see that there are actually 291 species that have been found over the 33 years. And they're broken down into 15 pages here, each page containing 20 species. And you can select any page that you want as you filter down looking for a specific species. There's also information here that tells us a little bit about each of the survey periods that has taken place. And the very first survey period started in 1987 and ran through 1991. So each one of these periods is a 5-year survey. And there's a number here that reflects how many species were found in that 5-year period. And then there's another number here that is the number of significant records that were found in that survey period. And the reason I say significant records is because, I mean, we're finding birds all the time, but they're not necessarily recorded in our graphs because there's already been an observation that filled a certain segment of our graph. So we'll get into that in just a second. So I've actually selected page number 9. Could have been any page at all, but I selected page number 9. And so we get a listing of 20 species here. Not all of them are showing up on my slide, but there should be 20 of them listed here. And this one happens to start with Say's Phoebe, and we can see we at least get to northern rough-winged swallow down here at the bottom, and there'd be a few more species below that. And you get a basic graph that shows the timing of when the bird has been seen at Fermilab within each one of those survey periods. And again, we could be looking at any one of these pages. I just happened to select page 9. So if I drill down a little further and I selected Yellow-throated Virio out of that page, we'll get a page dedicated specifically to Yellow-throated Virio. And so there's an enlargement of that graph. There's some breeding status information here. There will also be some photographs and other helpful information that would be associated with Yellow-throated Virio. Let's take a little closer look at what's going on with this bar chart here. And you can see that there's a rainbow of colors here, and each one of those represents a 5-year period. So this bottom bar here represents 1987 to 1991. The top bar, the most current one, or most current survey period, represents 2017 to 2021. So we're in the midst of that particular survey period. So you can see that there are also squares in the bar, and each one of those represents a quarter of a month. And there is a slight problem in calculating what is a quarter of a month, since some of our months have 30 days, some of them have 31 days, and we even have one that has 28 and on rare occasion 29 days. So there's actually a formulating for calculating something that we call a double day. So in a month that has 31 days in it, we have to up our tally to 32 days in order to equally divide up the months. So what that requires doing is creating one day that is the double day. And in the case where you have 31 days in a month, our double day ends up being on the 16th of the month. And so any birds that are seen on the 16th of the month will actually qualify to go into 2 quarter months. And here would be an example. Well, that wouldn't be a good example. But if you can see where my cursor is here, let's say we found a bird on the 16th. That square to the right would be filled in, and then the square to the left would also be filled in. So that's how we would utilize data found on the 16th. If we have a month that has 30 days in it, we now need to get up to 32 days, so that means we have to add 2 days. So we have 2 double days, and in this case, those double days end up being on the 8th of the month and on the 23rd of the month. And so any birds seen on the 8th or on the 23rd end up counting in 2 quarters of the month. So that seemed to be a reasonable way to solve that problem of rounding things out so that we have equal segments of the month. So we're going to take a look at another example here. This is a good one that helps you to understand how valuable this information is. And this one is covering the red-headed woodpecker. And so you can see in the early survey periods, we were having absolutely no problem whatsoever coming up with birds throughout the breeding season. And then you can see that we started to have some difficulty in this survey period, which was 1997 to 2001. And from that point forward, it keeps getting slightly worse until we got into these 2 survey periods, the green one here, which is 2007 through 2011, and then the one above that, which is 2012 to 2016. And so at that point in our history, we were having a very, very hard time coming up with red-headed woodpecker sightings during the breeding season. Well, last year, which is a part of the current survey period, you can see that all of a sudden we have a large band of color going through here. And so what that indicates is that, we did locate a breeding pair. And so then we were able to get data, throughout the remainder of that breeding season. So each one of these breeding seasons, or each one of these survey periods, you can think of as a 5-year slot of time. And so when you do not find, let's say, look at this green bar here, we have a gap right here. So that means that over 5 years in a row, we were not able to find a red-headed woodpecker during that quarter of the month. So that's quite significant. That's a lot different than just saying, well, we didn't find one this year. So the name of the game becomes trying to fill gaps. So during the first year of a survey period, so in this case, 2017, we'd be starting out with a clean slate. We would have all this other history to look at, but we're still basically starting out with a clean slate for that survey period. And we're trying to find birds, as many of those as we can, throughout various quarters of the month. Then the second, third, fourth, and fifth year, we're now trying to fill in those gaps. And that's the big game here, is to try and fill in gaps. We also look at the windows of opportunity in front of our records, so that, or at the back end of our records, so that we can try and expand the range of opportunity for locating that species. So even something like looking for a brown-headed cowbird now becomes significant if we have a gap to fill in a survey period. So these bar charts don't really reflect abundance, but a blank square does reflect the fact that you're having difficulty finding that species. So that in itself is quite significant. And data like this is available for all 291 species that have been found at Fermilab over the past 33 years. So here's a couple of the more recently found species. The whooping crane here on the right actually is kind of an interesting situation. I was attending a DuPage Birding Club meeting, and it happened to be members night. And one of the presenters that evening threw up a slide and said, oh, here's a couple of whooping cranes that I photographed flying over Fermilab. So I immediately after the meeting talked to that person and got the photo for verification. And so that became the 290th species for the site. Last year, we had a major fallout occur on the east end of Fermilab. And Fermilab is not exactly the greatest site for warbler migration, but we do get our fair share. And we just happened to get a really good fallout. This was last May, 2 Mays ago, I guess. And we have a very small woodlot on the east end. It's at the south end of one of the ponds called AEC. And it was just full of warblers that morning. And lo and behold, amongst all those warblers was a prairie warbler. So that became the 291st species found on site. So even after 30 some years, we're still adding species on a regular basis. It's really a lot of fun searching for new entries. So we're going to step back a little bit and talk about some of the other things that you might find on this website. And so one of them is recent sightings, which is kind of a journal of all of the activity that the bird monitors are conducting. And whenever they do go out, there will be a recording of their efforts that day. So the last one that I have recorded here, it looks like it's Friday, July 31st, 2020. And so here's a description of what went on that day, what species were found, and usually where they were found. Now, with COVID-19, most of the monitoring team is locked out of the site, but we do have an employee who is regularly doing some little checks for us. And so he's our only eyes on site right now. We hope to get back in the fall, and hopefully we won't have an interruption like this again. So having all this information out here, this is a site that a part of the site that you can view, and it's very useful information because you know, you can go out and do your own Fermilab birding experience. I'd like you to keep in mind that a lot of Fermilab is restricted. And so if you're unfamiliar with which areas are open to the public and which ones are not, you should probably ask the guards at the guard station for a map. And if they don't have them available, you can go to Wilson's Hall. In the lobby, there is a information desk, and you would easily be able to get that map at that site. So it's important that you adhere to which areas are open and which ones are closed, because birding at Fermilab is a privilege. And I can't stress enough that, you know, it's a privilege that can easily be taken away. There have been other groups that have had activities out at Fermilab in the past, and because they did not respect the site, they've actually been asked not to return to the site. That could easily happen to birders, and we don't want to see that happen. So do pay attention to which areas are open, which ones are closed, and adhere to those guidelines. So speaking of that, there's another section of the site that you can view, and this is called the site guide. And so what this goes over are the various places in the lab that are more or less birding hotspots. And there are several ones that you can drill down into. There's one here called the Village Lakes that would cover those lakes on the east end. There's Eola Road, which covers the stretches both north and south of Batavia Road on Eola Road, and those are great grassland areas to visit. The Bison Fields, the Main Ring, and the Main Injector. And again, many of these are restricted areas. So when you're reading the descriptions of these sites, it'll clearly say that they're restricted or not. So pay attention to that for sure. But as you look at those 5 main tabs that I just listed off, you can drill down further, and there'll be actually descriptions of various trails and seasonality and things like that that'll help you to help in planning your trip out to go birding at Fermilab. So there's a few other things that you can look at that I haven't covered today. There's a browser for pictures that you can look at, and so you'll get some video or views of birds that way. And then there's information, historical information on the spring count and on the Christmas count. There's actually a site map, and that would be one way you can access information on what areas are open and which ones are not. And there's a couple of various statistics and graphs that you can look at. And so you can do your own drilling down to get information about Fermilab. And if you want to go directly to the site rather than Googling, this would be the site name right here. So you can get to the site directly that way. So thanks for taking the time to view this video. And I hope we've given you some bird food for thought. And I hope you'll join us again in the future as we explore all things bird related.